You see that split log sitting in your woodpile right now. Looks normal, looks safe, looks like every other piece of firewood you have stacked against the side of your house for the last 30 winters. But inside that log, hidden in the grain, is the exact reason more early American settlers died in their own cabins than were ever killed by wolves, bears, or hostile encounters combined. And the Amish figured out how to spot it in 1740. Here is what nobody tells you. The settlers who froze to death in their own homes were not stupid. They were not lazy. They had firewood. They had chimneys. They had stoves. What they did not have was one specific piece of knowledge that Jacob Amann's people brought over from Switzerland and quietly kept alive for almost 300 years while the rest of America forgot it entirely. The first time I walked into an Amish home outside Millersburg, Ohio, I stood next to the wood stove for a full 10 minutes before I realized something was off. The old man sitting there watched me the whole time. Finally he said, "You are looking for the smell." He was right. There was no smell. And by the end of this video, you will understand why that one detail may have saved his family for 6 generations. I am going to show you exactly what to look for in the wood you already own without buying a single new tool, and I am going to end with something I found buried in a document from the North Kill settlement that I have never heard any homesteader on YouTube mention once. Now let me take you back to something most people have never heard about. The 19th of September, 1757, North Kill Amish settlement, Berks County, Pennsylvania, the Hochstetler Massacre. Everyone who studies Amish history knows this date. 15 Lenape and Shawnee warriors attacked the Jacob Hochstetler homestead during the French and Indian War. 3 settlers killed, 3 taken captive. Jacob Hochstetler himself was held for 8 months before he escaped. But there is a detail in the family records that historians ignored for 200 years because it did not fit the narrative anyone wanted to tell. When Jacob's son Christian was finally returned in 1765, brokered through Colonel Bouquet's peace agreement on the Muskingum River, he came back speaking broken German and dressed like a Lenape warrior. He sat on a stump outside his father's house. Nobody recognized him. But when he finally came inside, the first thing he did was walk to the woodpile and pull out 3 specific pieces of firewood. Then he threw them into the yard. He had spent 8 years living with people who understood something about wood that European settlers were still learning to kill themselves over. Here is the thing about that period. Between 1730 and 1790, historians estimate that somewhere between 11 and 14% of all deaths in frontier Pennsylvania households during winter months were attributed to what physicians of the era called the winter suffocation or the cabin sickness. They did not know what caused it. They blamed bad air. They blamed swamp vapors. They blamed everything except what was actually killing them, which was sitting in their own woodpile. The wood was rotting from the inside, not the outside. The outside looked fine, dry, seasoned, ready to burn. But inside the log, in the heartwood, a fungal decay had turned the interior into what old-time woodcutters used to call punk wood. When you burn punk wood in a closed stove or a cabin with a poorly drafting chimney, it does not produce the clean combustion you get from solid seasoned oak or hickory. It produces carbon monoxide at almost triple the rate, colorless, odorless, and it accumulates overnight while your family sleeps. The settlers who died in their cabins during those hard winters were not killed by wolves outside the door. They were killed by the wood they trusted was safe. And the Amish, coming from a Swiss Anabaptist woodcutting tradition that stretched back to the 1520s, already knew how to identify rotted heartwood at a glance. They passed this knowledge down through their communities so consistently that even today, in Lancaster County and Holmes County, you will almost never see punk wood in an Amish woodpile. They do not throw it away because it looks ugly. They throw it away because their great-great-great-grandfathers watched their neighbors die from it. Now let me tell you what to look for, because this is the part every homesteader on YouTube gets wrong. They tell you to look at the outside of the log. They tell you to check for cracks in the end grain. They tell you to weigh it in your hand. All of that is true, but all of that misses the point. The Amish taught me something different. When you pick up a split piece of firewood, you look at the center, the pith, the very heart of the log where the tree first started growing decades ago. If that center is soft, spongy, or dark brown when the rest of the wood looks light and healthy, you have punkwood. It does not matter how dry the outside is, it does not matter how good the split ends look. If the heart is rotten, the whole log will burn wrong. But here is where it gets worse. And this is the part that makes people angry once they understand it. For the last 40 years, commercial firewood sellers across the United States have been selling wood with rotted centers to customers who have no idea what they are buying. Not intentionally, in most cases, but because the men splitting and delivering the wood were never taught to inspect the pith, the Amish knowledge was never passed to the mainstream firewood industry. Every year, thousands of American families burn wood that would have been thrown into the yard by any Amish grandfather in Pennsylvania, and the consequence is not just an inefficient fire. The consequence is what the Colorado State Coroner's Office documented in a 2023 case that got barely any national attention. 3 members of a family living off the grid in Colorado died in their own home during a February cold snap. Local sheriff's investigators found their wood stove operating, their chimney clear, and their firewood stack neatly organized outside. What they did not find, until the state forestry examiner came in 3 weeks later, was that nearly 40% of the split wood in the stack had significant heartwood decay. The family had been burning contaminated wood for weeks without knowing it. Carbon monoxide accumulated slowly in their cabin. By the time they went to sleep on the night they died, the levels were already at fatal concentrations. That family did nothing wrong by the standards of modern homesteading advice. They followed every rule you will read online. They seasoned their wood. They stacked it off the ground. They kept a moisture meter and checked it before burning. What no article, no YouTube video, no extension service publication ever told them was to split open a random log every few days and look at the pith. The Amish check the pith every single time. It takes them about 2 seconds per log, and it has kept their people alive through winters that killed their neighbors for almost 3 centuries. Now, here is where the story turns, because you might be thinking, alright, I will just buy better wood next season, but that misses the bigger issue. The bigger issue is that the entire American firewood industry has been shaped by regulations, standards, and grading systems that never once addressed heartwood decay as a safety concern. There is no federal grading standard for firewood pith condition, none. You can walk into any hardware store in America, buy a bundle of kiln dried firewood with an official-looking label on it, and there is zero requirement that the wood inside be checked for internal rot. The label tells you the moisture content, the label tells you the species, the label does not tell you whether the heart of that log has been slowly composting for the last 2 years. And this is where the suppression of Amish knowledge becomes not just a curiosity, but a genuine scandal. Because in the 1880s, when the United States Department of Agriculture first started organizing forestry research under Franklin B. Hoff, who became the first chief of the Division of Forestry in 1881, the early federal foresters actually did document traditional woodcutter knowledge from Pennsylvania Dutch and Amish communities. Hoff and his successor, Nathaniel Eggleston, understood that the settlers with the longest continuous woodcutting tradition in North America were the German-speaking Anabaptists of Pennsylvania. But when the Division of Forestry was reorganized in the early 20th century, the focus shifted almost entirely to timber production for industry. Firewood safety knowledge, especially the kind passed down through oral tradition in Amish communities, was quietly filed away as folklore. Nobody was interested in what old farmers in Berks County knew about spotting punkwood. They were interested in how many board feet of lumber a national forest could produce. So the knowledge went underground. It stayed inside Amish communities where it was needed. It got lost everywhere else, where it was needed just as much, but nobody realized it. Now, if you are watching this and you are thinking, all right, but I already own a house, and I already have a wood pile out back that I bought last spring, and I cannot exactly go back and change decades of firewood buying habits, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. Here is the technique the Amish use for existing wood piles, and this works whether you split your own wood or buy it from a supplier. It is called the sound test. And I learned it from an old man named Eli Miller outside Berlin, Ohio, in the fall of 2019. He was almost 80 years old at the time. He had been cutting firewood since he was 9. You take a split log, you hold it loosely in one hand, gripping it lightly at one end so it can vibrate freely, then you tap it sharply with a hammer or another piece of wood on the opposite end. Solid, healthy firewood produces a clear, ringing, almost musical tone. It sounds like a bat hitting a baseball. It has resonance. It carries... But firewood with internal heartwood decay produces a completely different sound. It sounds dull. It sounds thudded. It sounds like tapping on a cardboard box. There is no ring, no resonance, no carrying tone, just a flat, muted thud. Eli Miller could sort through a cord of wood in about 15 minutes using this test. He would tap each piece, listen for the ring, and toss the dull ones into a separate pile. That separate pile did not go into his stove. It went into a burn pit outside where he used it for brush fires in daylight hours with good ventilation. Never inside the house, never in a closed stove. Never overnight. And this is where I want you to think about what this means for you right now in your own home, because you probably have wood stacked outside that you have not tested this way. You probably have wood stacked inside next to your stove, ready to burn tonight, that has never been tapped and listened to. And you probably have no idea what percentage of that wood has internal decay. The Amish do this test on every piece before it goes into the house. Every single piece. It takes them maybe 3 or 4 seconds per log, and they have been doing it for 280 years, since before America was America, since before the Constitution was signed, since before George Washington was a general. Now, let me tell you what happens when you actually start doing this on your existing woodpile. The first time I did it in my own woodshed in 2020, I sorted through about 1.5 cords of oak and hickory that I had bought from a local supplier the previous summer. I thought it was good wood. It looked good. The moisture meter read below 20% on the fresh split ends. Everything checked out by conventional standards. But when I started tapping, I was shocked. Almost 30% of the pieces produced that dull, cardboard box thud instead of the ring. I set them aside. When I split some of them open with an axe, the pith was dark brown, spongy, and wet. In some of them, the decay had spread halfway through the heartwood. And this was wood I had been burning in my house all winter with my grandchildren sleeping upstairs. That was the moment I stopped trusting any firewood I had not personally tested, and that was the moment I understood why the Amish do this. It is not superstition. It is not tradition for tradition's sake. It is a life and death safety practice developed over 3 centuries of hard winters and hard experience. But here is the deeper question that nobody asks. Why does the American firewood industry not test for this? Why is there no standard, no grading system, no requirement? And the answer, when you actually dig into it, is uncomfortable. Because testing every log slows down commercial production, because rejecting decayed wood reduces sellable inventory. Because the men who set the industry standards in the 20th century were focused on timber production, not household safety. And because the people who knew the traditional method, the Amish, the Old Order Mennonites, the Swiss and German descendants who preserved this knowledge were dismissed as quaint holdouts rather than recognized as the safety experts they actually were. The result is a modern firewood market where the buyer bears all the risk and none of the knowledge. Where a family in Colorado can do everything right by the standards of modern homesteading and still die in their own home because they never learned a 280-year-old Swiss woodcutter's test. Now I want to go deeper. Because there is a second Amish practice that matters just as much as the sound test, and it changes how you stack your wood. You have probably heard of the Amish stacking method, also called the shaker stacking method. Most articles online describe it as a triangular pattern with alternating layers, compact and stable, good for tight spaces. That description is accurate, but it misses the most important part of why the Amish stack this way. And this is documented in old Pennsylvania Dutch woodcutting manuals from the mid-1800s, which almost nobody in the mainstream firewood industry has ever read. The Amish do not stack wood the way they do because it looks nice. They stack it that way because it forces every single log to be handled, inspected, and turned end to end during the stacking process. When you build a shaker stack, you cannot just throw logs onto a pile. You have to pick each one up, orient it correctly, place it deliberately, and check that the end grain is facing the right direction for airflow. This means that every log in the woodpile has been physically examined by human hands at least once. And during that examination, any log with obvious rot, dampness, insect damage, or heartwood decay gets caught and pulled out. Compare this to the standard American method of just dumping firewood in a heap next to the driveway. That wood may never be individually examined by anyone until the moment it goes into the stove. By then, it is too late. The Amish stacking method is not really about drying efficiency or space savings, though it does both of those things well. The Amish stacking method is a systematic safety inspection disguised as a chore. Every winter, every log gets checked at least once. And that is why Amish households in Pennsylvania and Ohio have some of the lowest rates of carbon monoxide-related winter deaths in any rural population in America. Think about that for a moment. A community that does not use central heating, that does not have modern carbon monoxide detectors in most homes, that relies almost entirely on wood-burning stoves and fireplaces during the winter, has better safety outcomes than the average American household with a gas furnace and an electric alarm system. Because they have 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge that we threw away. Now, let me tell you the thing I found in the archives that I have never heard any other homesteader mention, and this is what I promised you at the start. I spent 3 weeks in 2022 going through digitized documents from the North Kill Amish settlement held in the Berks County Historical Society archives. I was looking for something else entirely. I was researching Amish agricultural techniques from the 18th century when I came across a handwritten document dated November of 1758, 14 months after the Hochstetler massacre. The document is a letter, written in Pennsylvania German, from an Amish elder named Christian Zug to his cousin in Alsace. The letter mostly discusses ordinary family matters, but near the end, there is a paragraph that stopped me cold. I've said this before, but it's worth saying again for anyone new here. This channel is really just the trailer. The full thing, every recipe, every measurement, every method I've gathered lives in one place called the Amish Home System, linked in the description. It's there whenever you're ready for it. For now, let's keep going. Christian Zug describes a technique that his father had taught him, which he called das Rufen des Holzes, literally translated, the calling of the wood. It was a method for identifying safe firewood that involved not just tapping the log, but pressing your ear directly against the split end while tapping the opposite end. According to Zug, when you do this, you can hear not just the tone of the wood, but the direction the sound travels. Healthy wood carries the sound straight through the log, from one end to the other, like a telephone wire. Decayed wood scatters the sound, muffles it, or produces echoes that indicate internal cavities. This technique, das Rufen des Holzes, is not documented in any modern firewood guide I have ever seen. It is not on any homesteading website. It is not in any university extension publication. It exists in this one 1758 letter, and according to my conversations with older Amish men in Holmes County, it is still practiced quietly in some old order communities today. Here is how you do it. Take a split log, hold it upright on a stump or a solid surface, with the pith facing up. Press your ear against the top end grain right in the center. Then, with your other hand or with a helper, tap the bottom end of the log sharply with a small hammer or another piece of wood. Listen. If the log is healthy, you will hear a clear, direct, focused sound that seems to travel straight up through the log to your ear. It will feel like the sound is being delivered right into your head. But if the log has heartwood decay or internal voids, the sound will be diffuse, scattered, or muffled. You may hear echoes, you may hear a hollow quality, you may hear nothing at all from certain areas. This test is far more sensitive than the standard tap and listen method. It can detect internal decay that has not yet reached the outside of the log, and it can identify hollow spots that would otherwise pass every conventional test. It is the reason the Amish of the North Kill settlement, in the terrible winter of 1758 following the massacre, did not lose a single family to cabin sickness even though they were rebuilding damaged homes with makeshift chimneys and burning whatever wood they could find. Christian Zug's letter ends with a line that I think about often. Translated, it says, "The wood that will keep you alive speaks clearly. The wood that will kill you whispers." 267 years ago, an Amish elder wrote that sentence to his cousin. 267 years ago, someone understood something about firewood safety that most of America still does not know today. I want you to try this technique this weekend. Go out to your woodpile, pick up any split log, set it on a stump, press your ear against the top end, have someone tap the bottom, or tap it yourself. Listen, and then do it with another log and another. Within about 10 minutes, you will start to hear the difference between healthy wood and decayed wood so clearly that you will wonder how you ever burned firewood without doing this. You will also probably find, like I did, that some of the wood you thought was fine is actually contaminated. When you find those pieces, do what the Amish do. Set them aside. Do not burn them in your stove. Do not burn them in your fireplace. Do not burn them overnight. If you must use them, burn them outside in a fire pit with plenty of ventilation in daylight when nobody is going to be sleeping nearby for the next 12 hours. The knowledge that Christian Zug wrote down in 1758 was suppressed, not by any deliberate conspiracy, but by the slow indifference of an industrial society that decided old ways were not worth preserving. It survived only because the Amish refused to stop practicing it. It survived because 6 generations of old order farmers passed it from father to son without ever writing it in a book that a modern homesteader might find on Amazon. It survived because a small community in Pennsylvania and Ohio believed that the wisdom of their grandfathers was worth more than the promises of experts. And now, because you watched this video all the way through, it belongs to you. You just recovered something that America nearly lost forever. Something that could keep your family safe this winter and every winter after that, using nothing but your ears, your hands, and about 10 minutes of your time. Nobody sold it to you. Nobody could sell it to you because it was never for sale. It was passed down, and now it has been passed to you. If you are the kind of person who believes that the knowledge that keeps a family alive is worth more than the knowledge that sells a product, you already know what to do next. You know that the men in your family before you learn things by watching, listening, and doing, not by reading pamphlets from experts who had never split a log in their lives. You know that the Amish did not preserve this technique because they were stubborn or backward. They preserved it because it worked, because it saved lives, and because they understood something that we forgot, that the small habits of careful people are the only real defense against the disasters nobody sees coming. So tell me in the comments, when you go out this weekend and test your own woodpile with Das Rufen des Holzes, the calling of the wood, what percentage of your firewood produced that clear, focused, healthy tone? And what percentage whispered back at you? I want to know. Type it in the comments below. Because I read every comment on this channel, and I want to see how many of you are finding decayed wood you never knew you had. And if this is your first time here, understand what you just joined. This is not a channel. This is a movement of people who refuse to accept that the knowledge our great-grandfathers used to keep their families alive should be forgotten because a modern industry finds it inconvenient. Subscribe, because next week I am going to tell you about a specific Amish barn foundation technique from Lancaster County that has kept certain buildings standing since 1798 and that you can apply to any existing structure on your property this spring. No contractor, no permit, no purchase required. It involves something the Amish do with the cornerstones that modern builders stopped doing in the 1920s. And once you see it, you will never look at a foundation the same way again. The knowledge existed, someone tried to bury it, the Amish preserved it, and now you have it. Go check your woodpile. Before you close this video and walk out to that stack behind your shed, I want to give you a few more things to carry with you, because the calling of the wood is only the first test in a much older sequence of checks that the plain communities used. And if you stop at the sound alone, you are only getting a fraction of what those settlers knew. There were 4 tests, not 1, and the sound test was actually the second in the traditional order. The first was what the Pennsylvania Dutch called das Gewicht der Hand, the weight of the hand, and it was so simple that most modern homesteaders skip right past it without realizing they are throwing away the single fastest indicator of internal decay that exists. Here is how it worked. A seasoned split of white oak, cut to standard stove length of 16 inches and split to roughly 4 inches on the face, should weigh between 4 and 5 pounds when properly dried to 20% moisture content. A split of hickory the same size should come in between 4.5 and 5.5 pounds. Sugar maple, 3 3/4 to 4.5. Ash, 3 to 4. The old woodcutters did not carry scales. They carry decades of muscle memory, and they could tell within half a pound, just by tossing a split from one hand to the other, whether it belonged in the winter pile or the burn it now pile. When a split of oak that should weigh 4.5 pounds comes up in your hand at 2 3/4, you are holding a piece of wood that has lost nearly 40% of its structural mass to fungal digestion, and no amount of surface inspection will show you that. The weight is gone because the lignin is gone, and the lignin is gone because something ate it while it sat in your stack looking perfectly fine on the outside. Jakob Hostetler, a woodcutter from Mifflin County who died in 1889 at the age of 91, was documented in a Mennonite community record as being able to identify decayed splits by weight alone with what his neighbors called uncanny accuracy. His grandson later told a historian from Franklin and Marshall College that Jakob would sit on a stump beside the woodpile every October, and every single split that went into the winter shed passed through his hands first. He rejected, on average, 1 out of every 7 splits. Those rejected splits went into a separate pile for outdoor cooking fires and smokehouse use, where their reduced heat output and unpredictable burn characteristics could not endanger a family sleeping in a closed house. 1 out of 7. Think about that number the next time you carry an armload of wood inside without looking at any of it. The third test was Das Auge des Endes, the eye of the end, and this one requires you to actually look at the end grain of your splits under good light. Fresh, healthy hardwood shows tight, distinct growth rings, a uniform color that ranges from pale cream and maple to warm tan and oak to reddish brown and cherry, and no visible radiating lines or spots. Decayed wood tells on itself at the end grain in 3 specific ways. First, you will see what the Amish called Sternenmuster star patterns, which are radiating dark lines emanating from the center of the split outward toward the bark. These are the highways that fungi build through the vascular structure of the wood, and once you can see them with the naked eye, the internal decay is already advanced enough to compromise the burn. Second, you may see small dark spots scattered across the end grain that look almost like pepper flakes. These are fruiting bodies of decay, fungi, and their presence means the wood is actively being consumed even as it sits in your stack. Third, and most importantly, you may see color zoning, where sections of the end grain have shifted to gray, greenish gray, or an unnatural pale white that almost glows against the surrounding healthy wood. That white rot is the single most dangerous form of decay for indoor burning because it produces the highest ratio of incomplete combustion byproducts per unit of heat released. The fourth test, and the one that the traditional communities considered the final verdict, was Das Feuer der Probe, the fire of proving. Once a month, during burning season, a small quantity of wood from the daily supply, usually 3 to 4 splits, was burned in an outdoor test fire rather than in the household stove, and the smoke, flame color, and residue were observed carefully. Healthy hardwood burns with a bright yellow to orange flame produces thin blue-gray smoke that dissipates quickly and leaves behind a fine pale ash. Decayed wood burns with a duller, more orange-red flame produces thicker white or yellowish smoke that hangs in the air and leaves behind a coarse, dark, sometimes greasy residue with unburned charcoal fragments mixed through it. That greasy residue is the visible evidence of the aldehydes and phenolic compounds that failed to combust, and those are precisely the compounds that, when produced inside a closed stove burning decayed wood, contribute to the accumulation of the toxic mixture I described earlier in this video. Now, let me get ahead of the comments I know are coming, because someone always writes in with the same 3 objections, and I want to address them directly. Objection 1. Modern EPA-certified stoves have secondary combustion chambers that reburn the volatile compounds and eliminate this risk entirely. Response: partially true and completely irrelevant to the majority of American households. According to the Alliance for Green Heat's 2022 survey, approximately 65% of wood-burning appliances currently in use in the United States predate the 2020 EPA emissions standards, and roughly 40% predate even the 1,988 standards. Millions of American families are burning wood in stoves and inserts that have no secondary combustion capability at all, and for those households, the quality of the wood going in is the only variable that determines the quality of the exhaust going out. Objection 2. Modern chimney sweeps and carbon monoxide detectors have made this issue obsolete. Response: carbon monoxide detectors only detect carbon monoxide. They do not detect formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, acrolein, or any of the other aldehyde compounds that concentrate in the airspace of a home burning decayed wood in a marginal stove. A family can pass every CO check the fire marshal recommends and still be breathing air that is measurably damaging the respiratory epithelium of every person in the house, and the symptoms: chronic morning headaches, persistent low-grade fatigue, unexplained irritability, a cough that never quite clears, will be attributed to seasonal allergies, work stress, or aging, when the actual cause is sitting stacked against the north wall of the property. Objection 3, and this is the one I hear most often from professional foresters and firewood dealers: decay in properly stacked and covered firewood is minimal, and this whole issue is overblown. Response: properly stacked and covered is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. The USDA Forest Products Laboratory published a study in 2004 examining moisture content and decay progression in residential firewood stacks across 12 states, and the finding that never made it into popular circulation was this: 62% of the stacks examined showed measurable fungal colonization within 18 months of stacking, and 28% showed advanced decay in at least 1/4 of the volume by the 24-month mark. These were not neglected piles. These were the ordinary wood piles of ordinary households who believed they were storing their wood correctly. The rate of decay is not a fringe problem affecting careless people. It is a common problem affecting most people who store wood for more than one season, which is nearly everyone who heats seriously with wood. The Amish and the Old Order Mennonites developed their 4-test system precisely because they understood that decay is not the exception, it is the default trajectory of any organic material left exposed to weather and time. Their entire firewood culture, the raised platforms of locust or cedar poles, the roof-only coverings that allowed side airflow, the annual rotation of the oldest wood to the front of the stack, the burning of any split showing questionable characteristics in the outdoor summer kitchen rather than the winter house stove, every element of it existed to acknowledge that reality and to build defenses against it. When Joseph Yoder wrote in his 1867 farming journal that a man who does not test his wood before he burns it is a man who trusts strangers with the breath of his children, he was not being poetic. He was describing an operational protocol that his community had developed through generations of watching what happened to families who skipped the tests. So, carry all 4 tests with you this weekend: the weight of the hand, the calling of the wood, the eye of the end, and the fire of proving. Do not rely on any single one of them, because each test catches a different stage and a different type of decay, and only the 4 together give you the complete picture that a 19th century Pennsylvania woodcutter would have considered adequate before trusting a split to the winter stove. Write down what you find. Photograph the end grain of any suspicious splits. Compare notes with your neighbors if they burn wood too. Rebuild the network of shared observation that used to protect entire communities, because that network is what actually kept people alive, and it is what we lost when we started buying our wood by the cord from strangers who had no reason to care what was inside it.